Hi, welcome back to the channel. In this video, we're going to walk through some of the most interesting photography effects that can be achieved through creatively choosing the right shutter speed. We're going to start with some fundamental concepts and explain what's going on in your camera so that you can better understand how to achieve creative shutter speed effects in your own photography today. Hanging just in front of the camera's sensor is a special shutter mechanism which allows us to control how long the sensor is exposed to light. This is fantastic for two reasons. We can control both the brightness of our shots by lengthening or shortening the amount of time that this shutter stays open, and we can also achieve some pretty amazing creative results by altering our shutter speed for different creative effects. Let's take a look at a couple of example images. What you see here is a great example of what can be achieved with longer than usual exposure times. In this case, photographing with 1/3 of a second allowed the seawater in the scene to move over this rocky shelf in front of me, and that slow shutter speed helped blur its movement. The result is quite a bit more interesting than a perfect freeze frame of this scene in the Faroe Islands. This example is quite the opposite, and I've actually frozen the scene completely by setting my shutter speed to a 25/100th of a second. The stop action effect is very effective in this case because it gives us the chance to study all of the amazing details in the riders and horses, not to mention the big blobs of falling snow which are being scattered around by the powerful movement of the racers. Sometimes it's a lot of fun to play around between the two ends of the spectrum, finding just the right shutter speed which allows you to both freeze and blur movement in the same scene. In this case, opening the shutter for 1.6 seconds gave my assistant enough time to move a colorful fabric around in the background, creating movement in the shot, while my model did her best to hold perfectly still. It's a fun effect to practice the next time you're shooting a portrait. And before we move on, let's get back outside for a quick practice shoot. I'm going to prepare my camera by switching into shutter priority mode, which is going to allow me to focus on the camera's shutter speed, and the camera is going to configure the other settings automatically. Okay, let's head out to the park. So to practice with our shutter speed, actually we just need a simple situation with some movement, and this fountain is going to work just fine. I've got the camera in shutter priority mode, which is going to allow me to focus simply on the shutter speed while I take a number of shots at different settings. So I'm going to start with a fast speed. In this case, I'm going to work with 1/1000th of a second, and I'm going to take this shot, and then without even taking my eye away from the viewfinder here, I'm just going to walk my speed down to a 500th of a second. We'll shoot this. Interesting result. And as we step down to a 250th, we should start to see a little bit more movement in this water. 125th, it's even more pronounced. And as I drop down to a 60th of a second, we really see quite a lot of streaking as this water flies through the air. These longer and longer shutter speeds are allowing that water to move further while the shutter is open, and so we're getting more of a movement effect in these shots as we slow down. Great. So I've come out here to the lake to take some bird photos, and I think if I'm going to take even a halfway interesting picture in this situation, I'm going to have to get myself very close to my subject, which in the case of birds doesn't seem all that likely. My other option is to attach a telephoto lens like my 300mm here, which is going to actually bring my subject closer to me by way of optical magnification. That seems much more realistic, so at this point I'm going to switch from my 25mm lens to my 300mm lens. Now you may be familiar with the problem that I'm about to encounter here. With my shorter standard lens, I was getting nice sharp pictures with shutter speeds of about a 60th of a second. But switching to this longer lens, the camera's become very sensitive to every little movement that I make while holding it. That movement is causing an unwanted blur in these first couple shots, so I'm going to speed up my shutter to compensate for this longer lens. A good rule of thumb to consider when you're photographing without a tripod is to take a look at the lens that you're shooting with and keep your shutter speed faster than the number associated with your lens. In this case, I'm shooting with a 300mm lens, so I'm going to take the opportunity now to bump my speed up to a 400th of a second, and that should hopefully create some sharper photos in these next shots. Let's see what happens. And voila, nice sharp picture. That's what we were going for. More and more lenses are coming out with built-in stabilization these days, which is fantastic. They certainly do help a lot, especially when photographing with a telephoto lens like this one. I noticed that the stabilizer can really help me stay pointed at my subject and get the composition that I want without accidentally drifting to either side and awkwardly cropping my subject the moment that I pull the trigger. But when it comes to the sharpness of my photos, I still prefer to rely on the tried and true method of keeping my shutter speed faster than the lens length. I'm not discounting stabilizers at all, but I find that the manufacturers claim them to be more effective at controlling sharpness than they are in reality. In my experience, it's much less risky to rely on the proven relationship between lens length and shutter speed than it is to rely on the latest, greatest stabilizer technology. I think we managed to scare away all of our subjects here. We don't have any birds in sight, so we're going to change location and talk about one more important factor to consider when you're choosing a shutter speed, and that is the movement of your subject. Where'd all the birds go? If the only thing we had to consider when choosing a shutter speed was our own shaky hands, then picking the right speed would be very simple. But of course, a big part of the game is considering the movement of our subject and choosing an appropriate speed to freeze that movement. Flying birds are moving much faster than those lazy guys who are just sitting around in the water. So the 400th of a second that I shot with before is far too slow to freeze the beating wings of these seagulls flying through the air. Here we can see a lot of movement in the shot. For the next shot, I'm going to speed up my shutter to more than 3 times the speed of my previous photo. In this example, we can see that a 1,250th of a second is fast enough to freeze most of the movement, except the wing tips, which were the fastest movement on this bird. To completely freeze the subject, including those very fast wing tips, I'll bump my shutter speed up again, this time to a 2,000th of a second. It's only with this very fast shutter speed that we see sharpness throughout the photo. By the way, as you practice this on your own, don't be surprised if you find that there's not enough light to photograph with these faster shutter speeds. Shooting with a 2,000th is nearly impossible indoors, and even outside on a dull day like this, don't be afraid to boost up that ISO. Modern cameras are capable of great results even at those higher ISO ratings, so don't be afraid to push that ISO upwards. As your photo editing skills improve, you'll be able to fix the grain problem very easily. But fixing your blurry action photos will always require reshooting them, so don't be an ISO weenie. Rather, get in the habit of changing that ISO often to accommodate the lighting situation that you're in. Let me take the chance to quickly tell you about the fantastic courses that we run over at viewfindermastery.com. If you want to learn photography in a clear and structured way from professional photography educators, then come and check us out over at viewfindermastery.com. We've got courses in all kinds of photography topics, from portraiture and sports photography to landscape and Lightroom, you name it. Of course, you don't have to take my word for it. We've got great customer ratings, so just check out our Google and Facebook ratings to hear what others are saying first. And then I would love to see you join us over at viewfindermastery.com. I would love to hear from you down in the comments below. Please like and share this video with your photography friends, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. And I will see you in the next video.